Well, that's it for a market analysis for this afternoon. But let's go to our first conversation today. Nigeria's oil and gas sector is showing signs of recovery following a period of stagnation. Reforms introduced by President Bola Tinubu since taking office in May 2023 have renewed investors' interest and triggered new projects commitments. Well, key reforms include the creation of a presidential energy office with full rollout of the Petroleum Industry Act and the removal of gasoline subsidies and the previous administration under President Muhammadu Buhari, which failed to implement structural reforms. Deepening sector's challenges after the 2014 and 2016 oil price collapse. Now, a major shift occurred in April 2025 with the appointment of Mr. Bashir Ojulari, a former Shell executive, as the head of the NNPC Limited. Now, the move was well received by the business community. Now, these changes have begun translating into investments. In 2024, Nigeria accounted for 3 of Africa's 4 final investment destinations and decisions in oil and gas industry, totaling more than $5 billion US, well, that's according to Wood Mackenzie. Offshore activity is driving the momentum. Projects have already attracted more than $8 billion US in commitment. One of the largest is Bonga Knot, led by Shell, Total Energies, ENI, and ExxonMobil, with expected production of 110,000 barrels per day, with about $5 billion in investment. My guest is Professor Emeritus in Petroleum Economics, Emmanuel Egboga Foundation, Abuja, Professor Omomi Iledare. Good afternoon, Prof. He joins me live from our Abuja studios. Prof, good afternoon and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Tulu, for inviting me. Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to your audience.
Thank you. I think we should start with the performance of the oil and gas sector in recent times, with the reforms that we've seen aimed at revitalizing and restoring confidence into this segment of Nigeria's economy. What is your assessment of what we've seen in about 24 months?
Yeah, thank you. Please increase your volume. But like I said, it's a pleasure to be here and to share my perspective. Before I give an opening remark, let me make some disclaimer. I represent myself, not the organizations that I belong to.
Okay.
And the objective is really to educate the public. Let me begin with a commendation. I think this administration, to a large extent, have allowed the Petroleum Industry Act to guide their decisions. To a large extent, they've attempted, to the extent possible, to allow the 2 regulatory institutions to be independent of each other and to be independent of NNPC Limited. That's commendable. Secondly, I think the administration is doing their best to enforce the commercialization provision of the PIA. There's still a lot of work to be done. And like I've said over and over again, if there's any area for me to continue to make a plea, is the policy institution of the PIA. It is still not functioning the way it is expected. NNPC Limited is commercialized. They have a good technical board. The Petroleum Commission and the Petroleum Authority, to a large extent, except perhaps competency advancement, they are doing what they are really been expected to do. I'm particularly delighted speaking to a Punch reporter about the importance of the expiration date of leases and licenses. And I am particularly happy that the Commission is paying attention to that. I know we have a lot of things to talk about, but finally, also the administration can be commended for efforts to invite investment to the upstream sector and even the downstream. There's still a lot of work to be done. And that's why I'll continue to plead with the president to do exactly what he did with NNPC Limited, with a technical board, with good understanding of the industry. Do the same thing with the Petroleum Commission before legality becomes an issue. Without a board of the Petroleum Commission for 2 years, or about 18 months now, I think the president needs to think about that. And the authority must have a board of directors. Going forward, I think for the next 2 years, the president should continue to be consistent and follow the PIA. Energy transition, and I think the government is in alignment, and that's why they continue to emphasize gas for domestic consumption first, and secondly, for export. I think the president needs to continue to balance the two market competitions, international market and domestic market. And this is where the policy institution must be energized, must be apolitical. I don't see that. But the president also can be commended with respect to indigenous participation in the industry. I think he has been very consistent with that. I think he needs to work a little bit more with what I call engagement with the Niger Delta people. The host community needs to find a way to engage them the more, to let them see that a barrel of oil that is not produced will affect even the development of their community in terms of future preparation. And I think to a large extent, if consistency is continuing to be preached, and if the institutional policy institution is better developed, if the PIA rules abide by with transparency and accountability, which to a large extent NNPC Limited is coming to terms with that. I think the sector is improving compared to the last 8 years. But these are just my opinion, and debatable, of course. But the evidence are there to support the progress we have made so far. It could be better. We must never identify or say it as it is when there are marginal improvement from where we started from 2 years ago.
It's great to start the conversation that way, Prof, if you can hear me clearly now. Can you hear me clearly, Prof?
Yes, but they can increase the volume a little bit. Yes,
all right.
I'm trying to.
All right, now, let's talk about crude production, which we are yet to meet OPEC's quota. What more can be done? All theft, sabotage, and all of that, we still have that challenge around that space. What will be your suggestion around that area? Because ramping up production is very key at this time. Yes,
certainly the expectation was 1.8 million barrels per day to 2 million. And basically over the last 2 years, on average, we are between 1.25 to 1.4 million. And of course, we can talk in terms of security. We are not going to delimit, we are not going to downplay the security impact. And that's where engagement becomes paramount. I don't think militarizing Niger Delta is the way to increase production. I think engagement with military enforcement is the key. And this is where transparency and accountability comes in. With technology today, you can easily spot where you have some of this criminality. And I think the president should continue to use carrot and stick. You should not hesitate to apply to the law to the fullness extent thereof. And you should not hesitate. I know when we wanted to tie host community fund with vandalization, there were resistance. But when the community realizes that they are not going to benefit unless production is enhanced, and I think there will be improvement. And finally, technical issues are also important. So you have some systemic issue. And that's why I'm going to come back to the same thing. The policy institution must be apolitical. Right now, the office of the president, and I'm not against the special advisor or But the policy institution must be continuous. So one administration must be able to build on that. That's where we want him to focus on. If we are going to increase production, there must be realignment of assets that are not effective in delivering. And this is where also the policy institution working with the Petroleum Commission will be able to look at some of the assets that need to be developed. I call it portfolio system analysis, where the country has an objective and they are weighted. And the companies have an objective and they are weighted. And then you rank some of these assets and put your weight on it to make on a periodic basis which assets should be on production, especially when you understand that technical production is different from marketed production. And what you need is the ability to meet your OPEC quota to support your revenue mobilization and development. And these are policy issues that competent workforce will be looking at on a regular basis. And this is where you have people that have the ability to be advisory to whatever institutions that lack the competency at this time, so as to be able to do the right thing. And I think this is possible. You have 37 billion barrels of reserve, and I've said it over and over again. There's no reason why you cannot produce 1 billion barrels per year with proper asset management strategy. And this is where you are going to be on top of the investors on a regular basis, engaging them, and just try to be apolitical in your conversation with them. Because oil business, even though it has political intricacies, the overall objective is maximization of investment return. And again, I'm glad that we are seeing some of the reward of the reform we started long years ago with so much investment going to the deep water, because the fiscal regime in the deep water is highly favorable, in my opinion. So I think we need to continue with that, especially since Nigeria, for a long time to come, we still depend on revenue. We must come to terms with the need to produce. And apart from militarization, there must be engagement. And that's why, to a large extent, you hardly see any attack on indigenous companies operating in the Niger Delta, because they are engaged with the community. And that's what I think the government must push for, that engagement. And if we are able to do that, it's public education. That we are still dependent on oil revenue. We must produce it, especially if there are markets for it.
Prof, let's move to the downstream. There's been a lot of activities, particularly with local refining progressing in recent times. But we still import a large portion or a sizable portion of products, that's of refined products. Why do we still have this mismatch? And what can be done to make sure that we improve this local capacity? Particularly at this time, we're looking at Nigeria first policy of government.
Well, I want to be careful with Nigerian first policy if it is transactional. If Nigerian first policy is transformational, it's understandable. But if it is transactional, then we have to be careful. And that's why I'm not particularly in support of using import license for petroleum products to promote competition in the downstream market in Nigeria. I think it's ill-advised. However, I will encourage the Petroleum Authority to step in the plate and be forceful in making sure that the local participants are not gouging the consumers. And these are not difficult. The local consumers are aware of a simple fact. The market system in the downstream Nigeria is not competitive. It is still anti-competitive, because you have dominant firms trying to maximize their share. And that's going to be at the detriment of the consumers. And I don't want you to look at low price as the end result. Because a low price now that is not sustainable on the basis of accessibility, availability, and sustainability is going to catch up again. That's what we are still battling with, because we allow petroleum product to be priced as if it's a public good. So the Petroleum Authority must not use licenses as a way to promote competition, because you are dealing with an international market that is seeing some dwindling in their share of the Nigerian market, the biggest market in Africa, and the fight to compete for it is this. So the authority must do whatever they can to support the local refineries in whichever way they can do it without creating additional market failure. And this is easy. Engage them. And I've suggested until the market becomes self-regulating, if I can use the word. There's nothing wrong in having a price modulation where you get all the stakeholders together and then look at the determinants of the petroleum product pricing and do a Monte Carlo simulation to create interval of where the price could be, and do it as the market indicators change. Again, it requires a competent hand, and it requires an authority that is willing to have a change in mindset from PPPRA point of view to a petroleum authority point of view. That is still a battle. That is still a battle. But we are making progress. We are making progress. And it begins with getting competent trainers to expose your workforce to the tools that they need, instead of the MKM approach to awarding training capacity contract. And that's why you have not seen the ability to do some of these things. Most of the time, you just get people that are supposed to give tools to your staff, just entertaining them. Please, don't get me wrong. I'm not condemning people, but I'm just saying that competency is the key. You cannot continue to depend on import license. Engage the local producers, work with them, find out what their return on investment is, find out the operating costs. That is even required by the law. Then analyze the data, and that will inform you as to the price range without setting the price. The PIA does not give the authority, the petroleum authority, the power to set the price of petroleum product. Nobody has the power. Even the president does not in the PIA. But the authority is there to make sure you don't gouge the consumers. And that's what an oligopoly market will do. And that's what you see the players are doing now. The authority must call them and engage them as more often as possible. That's their responsibility.
Indeed, in your suggestions, you talked about, that's about looking at your report, you talked about strengthening public engagement to build trust around the reforms. Finally, on this topic, our refineries again, back to local refining. Port Harcourt refinery is again shut down for maintenance. And many will say how we just got that refinery back to start producing, and now we are back to production. What more can be done to ensure transparency along our refineries operations in Nigeria as we move on? What can be done? And what will be your outlook for the industry, considering the present state of the reforms? Moving on for President Bola Tinubu.
Well, honestly speaking, I'm just, I hate when I see business ethics being compromised by professionals. It's not about whether you are religious or not religious. It's about your oath as a professional. So I'm hoping with this new administration in NNPC Limited, who are really the owner of the asset, I hope they will be transparent and accountable. And by the way, give me the permission on some of these issues to advise the GCEO of NNPC Limited. I know I can speak to him personally or privately. The less he speaks to the press, the better. And that's why you have a GGM communication. I want to advise him to be like the MD of Shell, the MD of Chevron. Less interaction with the press will do him a lot of good than having communication directly with the press. Because whatever he says will be spin. And by the way, I'm still going to address the refinery issue. By the way, he's not the one in charge of the oil and gas policy. No, he speaks for NNPC, not for the nation. And so when it comes to the Port Harcourt refinery, his perspective on the refinery is about profit maximization. And it is the responsibility of the GGM or whatever they call him now, either Chief Communication Officer, to let the public know why they shut down the refinery. It's not the responsibility of the GCO. So I'm going to advise him to that. Every refinery that is not optimal requires maintenance, just like your cars, your air conditioner at home. If your compressor is not picking up, you are not going to keep putting on your air conditioner and just burning electricity. As far as the current board is thinking, and rightly so, from an economic point of view, they do not want to put a barrel of crude oil into Port Harcourt refinery and get less than a barrel product out instead of more than a barrel. And so it is better for them to really shut it down and do a thorough reevaluation of the maintenance process. I won't need to explain. I mean, as the VC of a university, you don't have to be talking about why a student failed or not, unless it's a bigger picture. That's going to be my advice with Port Harcourt refinery. Be transparent, be accountable, and let only your GGM speak to the press on some of this issue. Because you have bigger things to do. That's why it's paid. Port Harcourt refinery needs to be maintained because it is destroying value. Repair is necessary. They are not getting more than a barrel of petroleum products from a barrel of crude oil that they put in. They don't want to put $70 crude per barrel, and what they are getting is not even $35 per barrel. So I think they are doing the right thing in that wise.
Interesting way to leave it, Prof. There's never enough time to have you speak around the oil and gas industry. But, Prof, I must thank you so much, Professor Omowumi Iledare. He is the Professor Emeritus Petroleum Economics, Malele Boga Foundation, Abuja. Thank you very much, Prof. I hope to see you again very soon.
Anytime. It's my pleasure. Thank you for your questions. Have a wonderful day.
Well, still to come on the show, we'll have more reactions to President Bola Tinubu's economic decisions. And now we'll focus on some decisions around the economy.